Good evening and welcome. I'm Steve Daney from polyphonic.org and welcome to this hangout. We're very pleased to be joined tonight by Kayleigh Miller, violist in the San Antonio Symphony, a yoga instructor and founder of the Musicians Health Collective. We're really fortunate to get to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking with Kayleigh and talking with her specifically about musician health, anatomy, and yoga. And the title of this webinar, Tips for Optimal Performance. So welcome, Kayleigh.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm
on a Google Hangout. I had to figure out what they were.
Yeah, and I said webinar, but it's Hangout is the correct terminology. So I have a few questions that I'm going to start out with, and then we'll certainly have some time for your questions, and absolutely want to encourage you to send me your questions. So you can do that a couple of ways. If you're watching on Google on the Hangout, you can just type a question into the question box in the Hangout. If you're not watching on Google, you can tweet us a question using the hashtag #PolyHangout. So again, the hashtag #PolyHangout. So Kayleigh, to start out with, I want to just ask you, tell us maybe a little bit about why you've become such a passionate advocate for musician health, teaching yoga, publishing blog posts and resources about musician health. What made you want to get involved in this?
I would say mostly accidental, and because it's become very important to my own self-care. So almost everything that I share is something that I've learned that's either become helpful in terms of day-to-day life or recovery from an injury or just, I don't know, overall maintenance. And so my teacher in undergrad, Kel Rodlin, was very into musician wellness and helping people to find a better sense of balance while playing the viola. And that stayed with me for many years, and that sort of led to me exploring nutrition and different foods and activities and movement. And eventually I decided to get teacher training 4.5 years ago in Boston for yoga, and have sort of since explored a lot of other movement things. But for me, learning all these things have made me a much better performer, a much better competitor at auditions, and better performance in orchestra and all different aspects of my musical career. And I want everyone to have those same resources that I have had.
Great, thanks. Do you think in general that musicians need to be more conscious of how their music making affects their body?
Yes and no. I don't know if you need to be conscious in every moment. I don't know if you need to have that moment-to-moment awareness when you're performing or under pressure. But I do think that daily practice is this amazing opportunity to start to explore not only your relationship with your body, but how the mechanics of your body affect the way that you play. So for a wind player, you don't necessarily need to think about the mechanics of breathing all the time, but it's good to think about, how am I sitting? How is that affecting my rib cage? How are my choices affecting my ability to have a full expansive breath for this piece or this particular situation? And if I do something differently, that might be better. So in my mind, yes, we need to become more aware, but almost as a starting point for exploration to become a better musician. And so for me, a lot of the body stuff that I do has been as a means of becoming a better violist and better player. On the other side of it, I think musicians forget, just on a larger scale, that we are humans and we are made to move and exercise and get out of the practice room, and our bodies are not meant to really just stay in a room and practice for 8 to 10 hours a day. It's not really what we were evolutionarily designed for, and definitely not designed to sit for 12 hours a day and not walk and not get out. So I think that's the other side of it, is like, you don't want to be too aware in your performance circumstances, but you also need to take care of yourself. And I think most musicians don't do that until something goes terribly wrong. So that's kind of my answer to that.
Great. So you've really taken the initiative of, learning a lot about musician health and gaining knowledge in this area. And you mentioned that you found that it's helped you improve your performance. Can you talk a little bit more about that, in terms of how it's helped you in performance, like endurance, or just generally feeling better. Talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I first of all play the viola, which is a really awkward instrument. It tends to be not ideally sized for most people. So that's a thing in itself. It's an asymmetrical instrument. So the mechanical input on one side of my body is very extreme over time. And so the combination of like mobility and strengthening that I've done through yoga, through biomechanic work and other stuff has really helped prevent left-sided issues, first of all, in terms of pain, tendonitis, overuse. So I've been able to mostly prevent repetitive stress injury. I only have had tendonitis once in 2009 during my master's degree, and that is it. So in terms of just managing my own health, I've been able to prevent injuries, nerve impingements, neck issues, and if things come up, I'm able to address them pretty quickly. In terms of, there's many different aspects to this. Yoga and meditation for me have been really profound, not only in terms of focus, but in terms of being more and more mentally aware of my mental patterning when I'm auditioning or performing, or really even just paying attention in an orchestra concert. So focus and being aware of my thoughts and noticing when my thoughts are not helping, which is a really big part of, I think, auditioning and competition, and just knowing when you have these really negative thought patterns, like, I'm not good enough, I'm never gonna win this. That's a whole other set of tools for me. And then the third part for me is as I start to become more aware and enhance my own proprioception, my own awareness of my body and space, I can start to explore different setups and be like, okay, well, I don't like my sound here. What can I mechanically do different? Why don't I try this? Why don't I do this? And there's almost a more fluid sense of play and improvisation in practice when I'm in that mindset, because, okay, well, let's try this. What about your balance? How are you standing? How are you breathing? Am I locking my knees? Am I tightening my quadriceps? And sometimes those things all work together and I find something better out of that. And for me, part of that is also the work that I do it's an organization called Andover Educators, and it's body mapping. And I'm also a trainee for them, and so I've gone to their conferences and worked with some of the master teachers, and that's a similar thought trajectory, like looking at performance and asking, what is your body doing here? What could maybe help with what you're working on, technically or musically or breathing or whatever.
Great, yeah, thanks. So for many musicians, and maybe some that are watching the Hangout tonight, tension in the upper body, like you're talking about with your left arm, is common, and we're in these awkward positions for long hours. What do you have any maybe specific recommendations for people? Obviously, all different instruments are going to have different issues, but maybe some general things that people can do to counteract the tension that we're going to have from spending long hours in these positions.
So I think the first thing is that we need to move in more diverse ways. So our body adapts to the shape that we put it in most frequently. And that's good because our body adapts to make things easier. But you have to always realize that that comes at a tax. There's something that's taking away. So my body adapting to playing the viola means that the inner arm muscles for me are much shorter and weaker, if you will, or tighter. And so I have to do things to keep my left side strength up. One thing that's actually been the most helpful for me, I have a hanging bar, like one that goes over the door in another room, and I do hang on that all the time. And even if you can't hang on that, most people never put their arms overhead on a regular basis, and just exploring other activities that require more ranges of motion than you're used to. So there's a whole world, there's external rotation, internal rotation, arms behind, arms up, any movement patterning that asks that of your shoulders, whether it be in swimming, in Pilates, in yoga, preferably something that's not CrossFit-y if you haven't done that kind of work before, but just finding a movement pattern that you like. I don't really care if people don't like yoga, that's totally fine, but finding something that challenges your typical movements and sort of undoing what you're doing with your upper body, I think, a lot of the time. The short form answer is do things. Do things that you're not probably doing right now, and get body work is amazing for sure.
Do things. I like that.
Move your body. That's probably it.
So do you have a daily routine of sorts of things you do, and or are there things you would recommend people do like you just talked about on a daily basis? Like these are things that musicians maybe should think about doing every day to really encourage.
So most people, if they've read my blog, they know that I teach self-massage with squishy rubber balls. And it's okay to laugh when I say that. It is ridiculous. But I actually do this work all along my spine, my neck, my shoulders, upper back, pecs every day, and it makes such an incredible difference. And then when I do get actual body work with a massage therapist, the amount of progress we can make on those issues is immense. I'm able to retain the work rather than having a massage and then everything kind of goes away after a day. So that's one thing that's been really helpful. In terms of traditional yoga stuff, anything, downward dog's a great pose. There are all different ways of modifying things like that, weight-bearing poses for upper body. But I usually do something weight-bearing for my upper body, whether it's a plank, downward dog, dolphin plank, or forearm plank, something in the morning to get my shoulders working better after a series of different dynamic warm-ups. And I think there are lots of videos and things like that on my website because it'll be ridiculous if I try to demonstrate it right now, I think. But there is a routine. For me, the self-massage has been really amazing just to do every day, especially if I wake up with aches and pains or know that I played 7 or 8 hours the day before and need to sort of work some stuff out before I do other stuff.
Great. When you mentioned before about auditioning, I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe think of performance anxiety, which is of course a huge topic. Have you found some of the things you're doing have, you talked about kind of being aware of your thoughts. Have you found that that's really helped you in that area, or with other people have you heard of these kinds of physical things, physical activities doing, actually helping you in terms of performance anxiety?
Yeah. So that's a big question. It's one that we've been talking a lot in very many different spheres. But one of my colleagues, John Beater, is making a documentary about performance anxiety in classical music and in orchestras and auditioning. And it's something that he and I have talked a lot about. It's something that Rob Knopper is talking a lot about in his Audition Hackers. And so starting to break down the audition. And I think what's really hard, such a huge topic, what's so hard is that there's so few jobs and there's so many people. And the amount of pressure that we put on ourselves when we go into that circumstance is really intense. Whether or not it's a small job, a regional job, or the LA Phil. I think we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do well. And if we don't do well, we haven't succeeded, or we're not good enough, or we'll never be good enough. And it's so easy to have this really downward spiral of thoughts. And if you have that before you audition, that's even worse because that affects just the way that you can play. And what's interesting is that beta blockers as a conversation has come up more and more lately. But in talking with all those people, including Dr. Noah Kageyama, who's based out of New York, psychologist, and they've all written about it and have different viewpoints. But beta blockers only address the physical sensations and not the mental. And like the mental stuff you have to start working on, whether it's building confidence or creating a positive sort of, I don't want to say recording, but like creating different circumstances of better mental patterning. And so for me, that the way into that has been because of meditation and yoga. But some people that's through martial arts, it's through other, ways, other mindfulness practices, so to speak. But for me, the meditation has been a really good way to notice when things are arising, when I'm, thinking something that's not helpful, and how to get myself back on target, whether it's in a performance or any circumstance, or even day-to-day practice when I space out and then I'm like, whoa, what am I doing? Why am I here? What's going on? So I think for me, yes. In terms of the exercise, movement, all that sort of stuff, there's definitely a correlation with just getting movement on the day of an audition or before to manage stress, to sort of stay healthy, keep your body working optimally. And I don't have a study off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's out there. And for me, that's walking and yoga and movement and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, it's sometimes also kettlebell swinging for me. So it's all bets are off. But I think everyone has their own routine or their own, what works best for them. And some people, it doesn't involve any of those things and they don't have any of those issues. And other people, it's exaggerated. I think part of the audition process, whether you're still in school and auditioning for festivals or you're an adult, whatever adulting means, is starting to find out what works for you and what comes up, and starting to keep track of these things and starting to ask the questions, well, what could I do better? And saying, okay, well, I always get this when I audition, or I always think this, and it's not good. So starting to work in that process of self-inquiry and questioning and applying it to auditioning as a process, rather than, if I don't win an audition next week, then I'm, gonna go become a real estate specialist or whatever. So it's kind of the long-winded answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a few more questions, but I wanted to take a quick second to remind people that if you want to submit a question, which I absolutely encourage you to do, you can send it in if you're on the Google Hangout in the question box, or if you want to tweet us a question, you can tweet us using the hashtag polyhangout, or you can email us a question at info@polyphonic.org. Any of those ways, info@polyphonic.org, hashtag polyhangout, or in the Google Hangout itself. So Kayleigh, you've talked about sitting, which is a huge other topic, but along those lines, what other daily activities should musicians be, again, conscious of in terms of how they affect our bodies and in turn our ability to perform at an optimal level?
It seems really silly, but I wish women, and I guess men to a certain degree, wore better shoes. And that sounds really strange, but the more I've learned about the way that high heels affect your body, especially when performing and competing, the more I'm like, it's not great. So when, for example, if a woman wears high heels while auditioning or performing, let's put an intense situation, your center of gravity is totally out of whack. Your ability, you're not in a neutral pelvis, you're not in a neutral spine, so you're distorting your natural spinal shape. Most people round forward into a kyphotic shape in the front of the body, which then prevents the ribs from expanding fully, which is a problem if you are under pressure or you play a wind instrument or you sing. And generally, because it's a stressful circumstance, you're also going into that nervous system fight or flight, where your breathing becomes more shallow and your ankles shake and your knees shake. And for some people, a muscle called their psoas also starts to tighten up, which is one of the big hip flexors running from your lumbar spine to the inside of your femur. So all these different things are happening that are affecting your diaphragm, that are affecting your ability to be upright. And I'm always secretly hoping that people will stop standing up in high heels while performing. So that's the really silly thing. But on something that's more general, I just wish more musicians walked. It seems really strange, but just got more day-to-day movement. And it doesn't have to be really intense exercise, but just incorporating more movement, taking the stairs, if your instrument's not the double bass, getting just day-to-day movement incorporated into your life, taking a practice break and walking around, taking the dog out, whatever, just making more frequent movement breaks part of your life, whether or not it's going to the gym. Because it's easy to fall off the going to the gym aspiration, but incorporating just more and more movement into your daily life, I think will have bigger effects on your upper body and your stress level and everything like that.
Great, yeah, some great thoughts. I mean, along those lines, this really ties into that, but do you think that there's a biggest mistake or multiple mistakes that musicians make most often in terms of staying healthy and in practicing or performance or dealing with tension or pain?
I think that most musicians don't look into self-care until something goes horribly wrong, whether it's tendinitis or an impingement of a nerve or some kind of serious pain. I think when you're young, especially if you're in college, there's this idea that I'm young, I'm invincible, it's going to be fine, which it might be. Some people live their whole lives without any injury, but I think more and more of us are practicing for longer hours and having a more intense musical experience earlier in life, high school and college, and that starts to affect our body's development and our ability to resist injury as we, age. And I wish that more people took that seriously when they're 18, 19, 20. I think it's very easy not to, and then have something quite debilitating happen at that age and not have either the resources or the mindset to handle it well. And I think along with that is having teachers that encourage their students to make reasonable plans. So if you're in school or graduate school, like not planning to practice 8 hours a day, but saying I can only practice this many hours, how am I going to structure it? And I think teachers can help students set reasonable goals in terms of what to accomplish and how to spend the time, and prevent students from spending way too much time doing things that are not accomplishing it. So that's kind of the big picture idea that I have.
Yeah, I mean, that made me think as you were saying that. I mean, I don't have a sense. Do you have a sense of like how many, like you said, some musicians will go their entire career without any issues, but I'm sure that many musicians do face some kind of performance-related injury. And
yeah. What's the
do you have a sense of like, what percentage we're talking about, or how many people really dig into these issues?
Yeah. So the ICSOM, which is the Society of Orchestral Musicians, they actually had a survey in the 80s, like the year I was born, on injuries. And I think at that time it was like 65% of musicians in the course of their career or in college would have an injury. Now, fortunately, somebody finally got together and said, we need to do another survey. So that just happened this year, and I have no idea what the results are. And I know that one also surveyed the use of beta blockers in auditions and performances and looking at performance psychology. But I've seen a wide range, basically from like 60 to 80% of musicians will have some kind of performance-related injury, but that can also mean hearing loss, that can mean vision loss, that could be a whole range of different things. It's not necessarily repetitive stress. But if we imagine that even just 60% of us, more than half, will have something related to pain or discomfort, I feel like that's a fairly high number and we should take it seriously. If it's 80, then we definitely take it seriously. But like, whatever it is, we're not talking about 10% here. It's a much higher number than that, for sure. I would be very interested to know what are the stats for orchestral musicians and hearing loss, because that's a big thing. I don't know if that was done recently, or band musicians or anybody that plays in a large ensemble with loud instruments, because I think that's a big thing. And also as we age, you and I are young, but like as we go into our 40s and 50s, all sorts of other stuff can happen. Herniated discs, fibromyalgia type stuff, arthritis, all sorts of other things kind of arise. How does that affect people playing music or so on and so forth? So it's a big topic, but it's a lot of us, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, silly question. Were you ever injured playing saxophone?
I have experienced some, just embouchure issues, which I think many, woodwind players have. And, I mean, I try to read about it and do some things, but I definitely found that, like you said, it was something that I didn't really address until there was a problem. And even at that point, struggled to figure out how to fix the problem, I think to a certain degree, and to find out how to address the problem.
Yeah.
So actually that was going to be another question. Mine was, do you have any thoughts in terms of like if people are experiencing some kind of physical issue related to performing or practicing. Do you have any advice for them in terms of how to get help or information, how they can address the problem?
It really depends. I will say that it's always good to see a doctor. Doctors do know things. It's interesting that we forget that. It's always good to get a diagnosis and figure out where you're at. There are some amazing physical therapists and occupational therapists out there. You just have to find them. I do find that embouchure stuff is harder to find in terms of resources and in terms of people willing to talk about focal dystonia related to embouchure or overuse stuff. So I will say that that's something, as a violist that played flute for 3 months, I have found very little about embouchure issues, but I find that a lot of people have them or have pain, especially as brass players. So that's something I am still very much kind of looking at. I found some very useful websites and blogs, but it's definitely tough. In terms of more general, larger musculoskeletal issues, there's the Performing Arts Medical Association, which has a lot of good resources and articles. I like to think that my blog has some useful stuff mixed in there. And there's also a collaboration with the MTNA, Musical Teachers of America, or something like that. They also have a collaboration with another, I think it's a physical therapist or a trainer, and they have a blog about sort of musician and healthy arts. So those are all good. It depends on your school. A lot of colleges, too, in particular, have physical therapists on staff or resources or healthy musician classes, and that can also be a good jumping off point if you're out of school. I find that most people, if you live in a city, if you live in Boston or New York, you will definitely know better practitioners than I will. But it's always good to ask people who they see and what they get out of it and kind of find your way into a practitioner. If you know, for example, that you have X, Y, and Z and you want to see an acupuncturist, you can always find someone that can help you with that if you're in a specific area. And ask your teacher, if you have a teacher. And if they're not helpful, that's a good sign that you may need other help or another teacher.
So that ties in perfectly to a question that has come in, which says, have you found a community of other artists and musicians in your area that are sensitive to these concerns? Could you talk about some simple ways that you and your colleagues have found to incorporate healthy postural and mental habits into your routine? So there's sort of two questions there, but
yeah.
Community, local community, and then ways that you've incorporated things into your routine.
Local community in Texas, not so much. A couple of my close friends, yes, but I would definitely not say that Texas is particularly receptive. But that's also to a lot of other stuff that I teach too, and it's many other teachers of either yoga tune-up or the biomechanics stuff for restorative exercise have struggled in Texas. But with my colleagues in the symphony, yes. And this was also true when I was in Ottawa. If people are having issues and they didn't know what to do, they often would come asking what to do. Especially when I was on tour with the orchestra in Ottawa to China. And a lot of times I would teach them how to do a ball sequence or self-massage sequence or look at some sort of basic shoulder mobility stuff, things like that. And with people in the symphony here, I've done a number of different sort of sessions looking at how they are set up, what issues they're having, how they sit, how they stand, and what could maybe be tweaked a little bit better to help them. So people kind of find me when things flare up, I think on a need to know basis, it seems like, which is all very good. Or people sometimes come to my workshops and my regular classes too that I teach.
And you mentioned before, your blog having some good resources. Can you just give folks the web address of that so that they have it?
Yeah, so it's Musicians Health Collective, www.musicianshealthcollective.com. And there is a resources page. There's a lot of blogs. I can even update, that makes me want to update the resource page a little bit more. But there are lots of good jumping off points if you're interested in Alexander technique or Feldenkrais or a number of other modalities and where you could find them in your area, things like that.
And the other organization you mentioned, Performing Arts
Medical Association. I think that's probably on there. Definitely the body mapping stuff that I've done is on there, and over educators. all the stuff that I've either personally trained in or think is awesome is pretty much on there for the most part. So investigate.
And now you mentioned biomechanics a couple of times. Could you just mention for people who may not know what that is, what that is, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so there is a teacher, a biomechanist, if you will, who is writing a lot about a bunch of different issues related to human development and biomechanics. Biomechanics is like the applying or application of physics through the lens of kinesiology and biology. So looking at how day-to-day activities, including forces and loads, things like that, if you ever took physics, how it affects our body. And I never liked physics, so it's kind of ironic that I love this particular field. But some of it is just looking at how a certain way of standing or walking or moving affects the geometry of your body and having an idea of loads and variability and things like that. The simplest example is my teacher, Katie Bowman, talks just about how you align the way that you stand. And the big thing for me is that your feet are going to be parallel and not turning out, because there's a whole fancy biomechanical reason, but if you think really simply, your car is aligned to have the tires going straight. You wouldn't have car tires out of alignment. And so we go through this whole explanation of looking at how and gait, how that affects things, and push off, and all sorts of fancy nerdy stuff. But a lot of times she distills concepts to a more basic level for people that are not interested in that, and then applying it. And so for me, it's also looking at applying that to music. So me assuming a certain shape, how is that affecting the tissues of my body over time? How can I start to work differently and undo that? Or someone that wears high heels all the time, how is that affecting their spine, their hips, their pelvis? How can we work to undo that from a perspective of biomechanics and understanding what the tissues have adapted to experience? It's still a mouthful. It's still sciencey and nerdy, but.
That's helpful. That's good. So I wanted to just ask, we haven't talked about yoga a lot specifically, but I know that, yoga is a big piece of what you do. And I think, more and more people are hearing about yoga's strengthening, and stretching benefits. And do you think that, maybe more and more musicians will try yoga out, if not do it all the time, but to try it out to see if that's something that, should be a part of their routine?
Yes and no. So yoga is in a kind of funny place in the US because there are millions of different styles, millions of different teachers, and I cannot make one generalization for the whole of yoga. So like a hot, sweaty flow yoga is very different than what I teach. And for someone who has restriction on the upper body or tendonitis, that would be a terrible class to go to. But conversely, they might really like a Bikram class, which I also don't teach and have no desire to because there's no weight on the arms. So I cannot speak for all the different variable movement aspects of yoga and all the different teachings. Some do a lot of weight bearing on the hands, which musicians can't do because they don't have full range of motion in terms of wrist extension. Some don't, it just depends. But the part of yoga that I hope everybody can get into is not only the movement part, but just becoming more aware of the breathing, the almost meditative aspect, which I think transcends the field of yoga, or what we think of in America as yoga asana. Because I think the introversion, the calming benefits for the nervous system, giving yourself time to sort of recover from a day of stress, I think that is very valuable. I can't promise that every yoga class in the US is safe for musicians, unfortunately. But I do think there are incredible benefits, especially in terms of managing day-to-day stress, auditions, performances, that yoga can really help with if you find a good teacher and things like that.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions. I want to remind people again, if you want to send in a question, please do, again, with the hashtag PolyHangout or on the Google Hangout. I have asked all the questions that I wanted to ask Kayleigh. So Kayleigh, I want to just give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that that we should be thinking about in terms of this topic? Anything else that we should know? Any other resources we should be looking at?
If the biomechanics stuff, if that interests you, there's a lot of stuff on my blog about it, and her name is Kayleigh Miller. She's written a lot of great books. If you're interested in the balls, it's Yoga Tune-Up, and the book is The Role Model. And I actually teach workshops both in Texas and outside for that, and assist trainings. I would also recommend that people get bodywork massages when they can afford it. It's incredibly good to look at some of the stuff that's going on in people's bodies and asking them, and just seeking out whatever movement you like, whether it's a kettlebell swing or lifting or whatever. Find someone that is highly trained in that field and can help you do it with good form, whether it's running or whatever, because finding movement professionals can help you do what you love, whatever that exercise is, safely and for a long time, rather than just winging it and hoping for the best.
Awesome. We have another question that's come in here that says, what are some of the qualities that you think would make a good yoga teacher, versus maybe a less good yoga teacher? How can people go about finding, a good fit for a musician?
And this is probably true for personal trainers and other stuff. I would look at their experience, how many years of teaching they have, how many trainings they have. So the base level for yoga is a 200-hour training. And there is a governing body called Yoga Alliance. So they might say certified or registered yoga teacher at the 200-hour level. The next level is 500 hours. So that would mean someone's done more training. If they've done additional specialization trainings, I've done stuff with working with cancer, working with children, all the yoga tune-up stuff. And so finding someone that perhaps has more than the base level of training. And the more experience they have, the better, generally, in my experience. Along with that is sometimes just scoping out their website and seeing if they have a website, what kind of pictures they have, what kind of writing they do, what kind of lineage they have. So if they're super into crazy arm balances and have an Instagram presence, and you have a lot of pain, that may not be the right person for you. Conversely, you want to find someone that's interesting and works for you, but looking at all of their credentials, and of course just taking a class. A lot of it is just finding, taking a class, deciding whether or not you like it. And the thing I would say with that is, if something doesn't work for you in a class, don't do it. Don't ever let a movement teacher, no matter what it is, CrossFit or running or whatever, tell you to do something that actually seems like a terrible idea. If it's an arm balance or a handstand or anything. So I would say trial and error to a certain degree, but just doing some research, see where they come from, see what movement background they bring. Most time when people write their bio, they're trying to think of a specific audience or a student that would be attracted to them in terms of, I want to help people live better in their bodies or heal past injuries or whatever. So definitely looking with a watchful eye.
Great. All right. Well, I want to say thanks very much to Kayleigh Miller for joining us tonight and giving us some really good information and great resources. A lot to think about on this topic, but definitely you're forging new ground and really doing some great stuff. So we appreciate you taking the time to give us your thoughts tonight.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
All right. Well, if you want to contact Kayleigh, I'm sure she'd be happy to hear from you and answer other questions. So can you give us that website address one more time, Kayleigh?
So Musicians Health Collective, www.musicians Health Collective. And then my website is just my name, kayleigh-miller.com. So lots of ways to hunt me down.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again for being with us tonight, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.